Hello, and welcome to this International Society of Automation Global Cybersecurity Alliance webinar. My name is Matthew, and I will be your Global Spec moderator, and I want to review a few housekeeping items with you before we begin. Please take a moment to familiarize yourself with the operation of the user interface for today's webinar. The large window with the heading Presentation in the upper left is the primary window for today's session. Just to the right of the main presentation window is the speaker bio window with background information on today's presenter. Just below that is the Q&A window. At any time during the presentation, you can enter a question into the box in the lower section of the window and click Submit. Your question will be placed into the queue to address when we get to the Q&A session. At the bottom of your screen, you will see additional buttons to enhance your webinar experience. To see what a particular button does, just place your mouse pointer over it and a tooltip will appear with a description of the button's function. Now let me introduce today's presenter. With us today is Andre Ristaino, the Managing Director at ISA Automation Standards Compliance Institute. To read more about Andre, please look at the speaker bio window right next to the main presentation window. And with that, let's get started. Andre, welcome to today's event. And with that, I will pass things along to you to begin. Please go ahead.
Thanks, Matt, and good day to our participants. So I'm going to talk about public policy for protecting critical infrastructure from cyber attacks. Interestingly, just last week, July 28th, there was a memorandum issued by the Biden administration that was specifically directed towards establishing policy for securing critical infrastructure here in the United States. So we can talk about that a little bit more during the Q&A, but at this point I'll move on and provide some background on ISA and what ISA has been doing and how that leads into our positioning on public policies. So ISA is a professional engineering society for automation engineers. It's kind of an unknown professional engineering discipline for a number of years, but as our society has evolved, automation and control systems are affecting our everyday lives, from water and wastewater to building and smart cities, elevators, escalators, security systems, traffic control, everything. And so the work that ISA has been doing in the shadows, if you will, is starting to bubble up. So the organization has about 38,000 members. It's global in nature, in 44 countries, and through our conferences and other events, we touch about 350,000 customers a year. ISA is also an ANSI accredited standards development organization. We've published over 150 standards since ISA has been in existence. This past year, we celebrated our 75th anniversary, so we've been around since 1945. The organization started out as a few engineers getting together to find standardized ways to calibrate pressure and temperature sensors so that they could manage processes without having things like steam boilers explode or excess water in steam systems and the like. So we do education, help the engineers sharpen the saw, if you will. We also do certification of engineers and technicians in the discipline. We have conferences and a referee journal called InTech, and we help out with compliance to the standards. So I mentioned that we've published over 150 standards related to automation. It covers everything from HMI to data schemas, symbols, like if you're using a control system, we have a standardized way of symbolizing things like pumps, people, processes. We have an industrial communication standard. We wrote the safety standard, which is used globally now. We do training and certification. We've trained thousands and thousands of individuals based both on fundamental topics, operating site safety, and more recently, we've trained many cybersecurity practitioners. So one of the standards that are most relevant to our topic is ISA 99 Global Cybersecurity Standards. So this standards committee was stood up in 2002 after the 9/11 event in the United States. The engineers unilaterally recognized that there were not just physical attacks that could be brought on, but cyber attacks that could do just as much damage to our safety and our livelihoods and our way of life. Today, the standards have been internationalized. We've adopted the nomenclature of the naming to call them the ISA 62443 standards. They've been adopted by the International Electrotechnical Commission. It's a global standardization organization like ISO, and it has the name IEC 62443. So if you see the standards being called IEC 62443 or ISA 62443, just know that they're the exact same standard. They have the exact same technical requirements, and so there's no difference. In some geographies like the EU, they'll likely be adopted as like an EN Senelec standard, which just has that prefix on it. They've already been recognized by the United Nations Commission on Trade, and so they're starting to become recognized and adopted more and more globally as folks become familiar with them. So the standards there's 15 sections in the standard. It makes it look onerous to see so many different sections, but they're organized into 4 layers. The top layer is provides the definitions, vocabulary, lexicons, other models, master glossary. There are conformance metrics being set up for measuring conformance to the standards. And then there's use cases, a use case library being developed as well. But the green level and next level down are the 5 standards that are addressing the owner-operators, so how to secure your operating site. So if you're a water or wastewater facility, or if you're a building and you want to secure your controls, or a smart city application, these are the standards that provide the guidance. They also provide metrics, so they show protection levels, 1, 2, 3, and 4, depending on what type of risk environment you're in. They address patch management. They also include requirements for service providers, so system integrator that's installing systems, there's requirements for them, and then maintenance service. So if there's a company that's doing maintenance and even operation on your system, it addresses that. And I think I mentioned the patch management. The next level down is system level security. So I'll take a step back. So for owner operators, the metrics are oriented towards confirming that you're achieving your target level of security. So you can design your system, and there's 4 levels. If there's a level 3 that you want to achieve, you would use these standards as a basis for evaluating how well you're doing and providing guidance on getting you there. So the next level down is security requirements for systems, and it gives you requirements for your target level of security. It provides a basis for doing risk assessment for your system, and it provides information on security technology for your control system. And then at the bottom level, there's the 2 standards. They address the security lifecycle for developing products and subsystems that would be used in a automation solution, and also includes requirements for meeting security levels 1, 2, 3, or 4 for the components. And so there's 4 component categories that are defined in these standards. So that's kind of the overview of what the 15 standards are. And so, it's important to recognize that depending on who you are, whether you're an asset owner or if you're a product supplier, you don't have to know all 15 standards. There's 3 or 4 that are relevant to what you do as an activity. One of the foundations of the 62443 standards is that there's a security lifecycle and stakeholder roles in each of the security lifecycle phases. So if you're a supplier, you design and manufacture commercial off-the-shelf control systems. So there's standards that provide guidance and measurable metrics for meeting security level for your products. If you're a system integrator, like an engineering, procurement, construction firm, or your operations and maintenance service provider, there's a set of standards that provide guidance on integrating products securely and ensuring that when you're doing patches and other types of maintenance that you're not degrading the security capabilities that were achieved during the installation. Then as an asset owner operator, same thing. There's standards that address people, process, and technology. The asset owners own and operate and eventually retire site-specific systems. So if you look at this, you can see that to ensure security, that there's a shared responsibility from the supplier who builds it to the integrators who integrate the products to the asset owners that own, operate, and retire these systems. So in the end, if there's some type of incident that looks like it could be cyber related, you typically would have a triage of these 3 different stakeholder groups: asset owners, the integrators, and suppliers, to determine whether you really have a cyber incident or if it's a self-inflicted wound, if you will, from not following procedures for operations, maintenance, or upgrades, or patch management. And so, again, there's standards that address each of these categories. This is just a different way of looking at the same thing. There's a little bit of an eye chart on the side, but this enumerates each of the standards that each of these stakeholder groups would actually use. Asset owner, there's 4 or 5 standards for them. Maintenance service provider, integration service provider. So this just makes it easy to see. Okay. So, what else is ISA and companies in ISA's orbit? What are we doing to address cybersecurity? So, as a not-for-profit, ISA ends up being a excellent forum for standing up groups to do activities that are industry related, where there's multiple companies, and we can address things like intellectual property ownership, make sure that everybody's following the rules for not violating antitrust, where you have multiple companies. So okay. So one organization is called Logic, and so this is a consortium of 5 oil majors and some others, and so this group does research on security vulnerabilities and automation related to oil and gas exploration, extraction, and refining. And they work in partnership with Department of Homeland Security and soon CISA, and we get some matching funds for doing this type of research. The results of the research are published. If the results that are sensitive are kept private and fed back to the supplier organizations if appropriate. But this helps out with the industry identifying areas of vulnerabilities, areas to seek to secure. the beauty of this is that the automation technology is pretty much a technology horizontal. So a lot of the same type of technology that's used in the oil and gas extraction and refining and industrial processes is used in many other sectors like water, wastewater, power generation. So it provides a benefit to a lot of other industry sectors. Another organization which we stood up 2 years ago was the ISA Global Cybersecurity Alliance, and its mission is to bridge the gap between the 62443 standards and market adoption. So the standards really provide the best practices, policies, procedures as a basis for securing our critical infrastructure. But there's 15 standards. They look complicated. It's daunting, and so when you wake up on Monday morning, the question is, well, how do I get this rolled out to my people? Some of them are end users, others are technicians, etc. So we're developing white papers, other types of tools, and presentations, mini learning modules, on the education front to help with the adoption and training. Training and education is something that ISA does in a big way, and so this organization is working with end users and suppliers to identify where the gaps are and go after those to accelerate adoption of best practices. Then another organization that was stood up in 2007, ISASecurity Compliance Institute. They run a product certification scheme based on the 62443 standards. So this was the first global cybersecurity certification scheme purpose-built for automation and control systems. It's been operating, the first certificate was issued in 2010, and it's been operating ever since. Last year we did over 25 certifications. Some of them were the process certifications for the product development process. Organizations having products certified include big companies like Emerson, Siemens, Honeywell. You can go down the list. So again, there's some of the history on ISASecure. So we had been promoting adoption of the standards globally, and we collaborate with a lot of organizations. Again, we've been operating since 2011. Here's a few of the companies that have been supporters of this. Like you can see there, it started out with a lot of organizations in oil and gas and has expanded out. You can see some major automation system suppliers. This particular certification program is very buttoned down, has a high level of credibility. There are others that are out there, certification programs. Most of them are modeled after this. And at the risk of sounding like we're bragging, this is kind of a model program that most of the other organizations, we're the gold standard, if you will. And we're organized where we set up memorandums with global accreditation bodies all everywhere: Singapore, North America, Japan, Germany, Canada, Taiwan. And those accreditation bodies accredit certification bodies that are in our certification program. So currently we have an organization in Japan, one based in the U.S., one based in Germany. But these are almost all of them are global in nature. You can see DNVGL, TÜV SÜD, Applied Risk, Trusted Labs. We have organizations in Madrid, Italy, and now newer ones in Taiwan, and another in North America. So it's a who's who of the top 20 labs or certification bodies around the globe. And by organizing this way, it provides us the capability to scale our operations. So we don't run labs. We develop the specifications for accreditation and for certification, and have globally recognized accreditation bodies do the accrediting, and we have globally recognized certification bodies do the product assessments. So what's on our roadmap, in addition to straight out doing products, there's IIoT devices and gateways. They have some unique characteristics, and so we've done a study to determine how to best apply the 62443 standards for IIoT devices and gateways. We're going to offer a certification in 2022 on these for number 1 and 2. And we're also developing an operating site assessment. So that's the end user set of standards. And so I'm not going to call that certification, but I will call it assessing a site to the standards. And this will be useful in that when we have the specification, operating sites can use this specification and do their own internal auditing and process improvement. They may not want a third-party site assessment, but certainly as we develop more of these work products and specifications, they'll have the ability to do self-improvement based on our site specifications. We do a lot of collaboration. So there's this group called the Open Process Automation Forum. They're trying to commoditize control systems that are used in industrial and other processes, similar to using, commoditized servers and then operating systems, and then you have your applications. So they're doing the same thing. They're putting a set of specifications together, so it looks a lot like what happened in the IT world in the 80s and 90s. And so they're using our specification and one of our labs to do testing of their prototypes. Eventually, it'll get rolled out to all the labs. We're working with a stand-up organization who's solely focused on building cybersecurity, the technology that runs smart buildings and connects to smart cities. So we're helping them develop the specification based on 62443. Another group, there's a bulk power system working group, and they're seeking ways to secure the systems and the supply chain for products that are used in the U.S. bulk power system. So we've stood up a group that operates in one of our forums. It's not something we advertise a lot, but we are doing that. Another industry consortium called Design Lights Consortium, they provide certification for energy efficiency and some other types of standards for lighting controls. One of the dimensions is the security. So there's a few accepted standards that can be used to get their certification, and so they include ISASecure as one of them. And then the ISASecurity Compliance Institute also does joint studies with the ISA Global Cybersecurity Alliance. There's a lot of overlap in the membership, so we do standards cross-references and best practices and others. So there's some links here. You can see the details on what we're doing. So I'll talk a little bit about the ISA Global Cybersecurity Alliance. So you can see the companies that are part of this. We have over 50 companies. The major automation solution providers: Schneider, Rockwell, Honeywell, Johnson Controls, Eaton. I'll probably leave some out, but nobody should have their feelings hurt. And then we're adding, we're focused on adding end users. So we have Petronas, it's a big oil company, Johns Manville, and others that are joining as end users. And we just recently stood up an end user council to get more input from end user companies. You can see we also have some of the big six or big four now consulting firms like KPMG and Deloitte. They all run risk management practices, and they want to expand from traditional IT to OT. More and more there's starting to be less of a separation and more overlap, and so it's just a natural evolution to provide more of a holistic set of services to address this. So, and then you see a lot of companies that are, you know, the traditional cybersecurity products and services providers like Dragos, Nozomi, Clarity, Bayshore, and you know, we also have Underwriter Labs as part of this group supporting this initiative. So what does ISA Global Cybersecurity Alliance do? So in short, we're bridging the gap between ISA 62443 standards and its adoption. We're just education, many learning modules, presentations, development of white papers, working with other industry groups, as I've shown, workforce training. That's a very, very big topic area. A lot of the practitioners in the critical infrastructure industries like electric, power generation, distribution, water, wastewater, they're retiring or have retired, and COVID accelerated this, in fact. And so there's a big gap in just the basic automation and control technicians and engineers, let alone the ones with cybersecurity capabilities. So we're working with other organizations, government organizations like INL, CISA, to provide guidance on establishing curriculums and actually doing training. Okay, so some of the work products. So we did a quick start guide that provides an overview of product certification. You know, what is a product of certification? Why is it useful if you're an end user? Why is it useful if you're a product supplier? How it fits into your total security scheme, you know, depending on which stakeholder group you're in. And we did two other white papers. They're about 12 or 14 pages each, so they're a lot easier to read than you know, 900, 1,200 pages of the standards. So these just provide an overview of the standards, how they're used, and you know, applicability depending on what stakeholder group you're in. A couple other work products we developed. We see a lot of discussion about ISO 27001 and 2. So if you're coming from the IT world, it's very likely that you use that as a basis for establishing your information system management scheme. And so, you know, there have been discussions that are like an either-or discussion. Should I use the 27001 or 62443 if I'm securing an operating site? Well, the answer is both. And so this paper describes how those two sets of standards dovetail with one another. And it makes it a lot easier because typically, you know, in a company that has a lot of locations, you have a chief information officer, and they're responsible for everything. And so, you know, they've been accustomed to ISO 27000, but they need something that's a little bit more robust for and purpose-built for the operational technology. There are some differences. And so this paper helps explain that. And then we have two white papers coming out, one in a couple of weeks, you know, applying the 62443 standards for IIoT devices. And the second report, it's a little more complex. These aren't trivial, so this one's about an 87-page report applying the 62443 standards to IoT devices, and then another one's going to come out in closer to Q4, like November, before Thanksgiving, on applying the standards to the systems. So if you can see, what we're doing is the set of standards covers the full life cycle of operational technology in our critical infrastructure. It's useful, it has metrics, it has practices, and it really should be the go-to standards that get referenced by public policy. So a little bit more about ISAGCA. So if you look at the member companies and some of the consortiums that are also included, it represents about 1.5 trillion in annual revenue. So these organizations you see, they're name brand companies and cover a lot of different industries, from automation suppliers, IT suppliers, industry participants. Another fast fact is that product suppliers, most of the ones that you see on our list have been developing product and getting them certified to the 62443 standards. They've been doing this since 2010. Many of them have gotten their product certified under our ISASecure certification scheme, and there's some other avenues, other certification bodies that are credible that are also doing this type of a certification. But I mean, you look at this, ABB, Aviva, Osbil, Carrier Corporation, Cisco, Eaton, Emerson. These are all major organizations that are kind of thought leaders and leading the charge in getting the product certified. GE, Hitachi, Yokogawa, Schneider Electric, go down the list. So what else is ISAGCA doing? Well, we've entered into a public-private partnership with CISA. We're standing up this organization called ICS for ICS. That stands for Incident Command System for Industrial Control System. So it's basically, its purpose is to organize incident response capability for industries that aren't fully organized. So if you look at the power sector, if there's a hurricane in Florida, for instance, they have mutual agreements, and these are all done through FEMA and DHS, and they have agreements to help one another rebuild damaged infrastructure. And so we're just setting up the same thing related to attacks or damages that are cyber in nature. And so this is a difficult, complex project and process, and requires both the private sector and the public sector. So you need CISA and the government to provide an environment to operate in. There's lots of issues related to liability and just governance. So, government has a key role in this, but we're working with government and building this from the ground up. So global references to the 62443 standards, and the European Union and ESA has published a document, Good Practices for an EU ICS Testing Coordination Capability. I actually was an invited expert on establishing a certification program in the EU back in 2015, 16, and 17. There were a series of meetings and reports issued, and so the European Commission, through its political process, has to establish policy and any type of legislation that would enact, the results of that report. And so that's ongoing in their sausage-making process. In the USA, in 2014, we contributed to the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, and it included references to ISA/IEC 62443 for the OT security dimensions of the CSF, we call it. And so there's actually more references to 62443 than any other standard in the NIST framework. In Singapore, it's referenced in their Cybersecurity Code of Practice, and there's a bunch of others. We're working with the legislatures in New York and Florida. They've been looking for ways to enact legislation to provide both incentives and requirements for securing critical infrastructure in their states. And we're just trying to get 62443 the light of day so they can use it as a reference standard in their policy making. So our public policy position is that the federal government, state governments establish a policy through legislation to require adoption of cybersecurity best practices for industries and critical infrastructure as a starting point, and it should require industry sectors to establish approaches based on the NIST CSF, and it would elevate the NIST CSF and the ISA 62443 references for the purpose of measuring adoption. Again, the standards would provide objective, measurable requirements fit for purpose for operational technology. There's a lot of ways to do this that could be based on incentives. We also have had conversations, and we have ongoing conversations in collaboration with the insurance industry. So, in addition to law, we think, similar to other industries like, the automotive, you collaborate with the insurance industry and provide incentives. So we think there's an incentive-based way to roll out requirements for securing automation and controls that affect our everyday lives. And there may be some others that are just mandatory requirements that may not be able to provide incentives. So we're the experts. We have a lot of reach, to bring in technology experts, but we're not legislators. We're not policy experts, and so we've begun the process of contacting our government representatives in New York and Florida, and also through the federal agencies like FEMA, DHS, and CISA, to help provide the technical input into their policy making and legislation. So it's a long process. DHS and CISA don't make laws. The president can issue an executive order, and this thing that was just issued a week ago, July 28th, the memorandum on national security, it's not a law, but he's directing his agencies to address this cybersecurity problem. I don't know how that shakes out, but my guess is that eventually these policies need to be, some of them need to be turned into either a regulation or legislation to be fully enacted. Okay, so benefits of basing public policy on this standard. So standards have been around for ages, and they have value. They basically provide the blueprint, best practices, textbook, if you will, for securing your automation and control systems. So for 62443, it's the only international standard purpose-built for securing automation and control systems. It provides standard vocabulary, terms, terminology, and architectures. And so if there's public policy, legislation, regulation, rulemaking, if it eventually references these standards, everybody's using the same vocabulary and standards for enacting these new conditions. The biggest value is that the standards codify hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, of cybersecurity subject matter expertise in one set of documents. So, you're not going to have legislative aides that are learning this stuff as they go and helping to draft language. There's that includes prescriptive security technology, security requirements, security terminology. It already exists in the standards, and so they can be referenced. The 62443 standards is already being adopted by the supplier community, the folks that are making the automation and control systems. And so they're familiar with them. They help write them. They're using them. They're getting products certified by them. So, we know for sure that they're embracing them wholesale. And so they like these standards, particularly because they're international. And that's important because all of these big companies, and even the small ones, they operate both in the U.S. and internationally in the EU, Japan, Asia. And so they really want to see one set of standards, and it makes it economically efficient to certify products to one set of standards. And similarly, there are corporations or organizations that have operations that cross state and national borders, particularly in the EU, but U.S.-based corporations operate globally. So from an operational perspective, they would want to have one set of standards to use for their corporate engineering for safety and security. These standards are being evaluated by insurance companies as a basis for evaluating operating sites. And there are mature cybersecurity product certification schemes already operating. We operate one of them. You know, there's some others out there, but we think ours is an excellent program. So that's my talk on for today's presentation. I'll end there and take some time out for some discussion.
Thank you, Andre. That was a great presentation, and thank you so much for that. And we are going to move into the Q&A session now. I do see we have a few questions that have come in from the attendees, so we're going to move into answering those in a minute. If we don't get to your question, don't worry, we will provide an answer following the webinar. And lastly, if you haven't submitted your question yet, you can still do so now by entering it in the Q&A box on your screen and clicking submit, and we'll try to answer it before the close of the session. Okay, now for our first question from the audience. What is the ISAGCA doing now to promote the awareness and adoption of the ISA/IEC 62443 standards? Andre?
Yeah, so there's a couple of routes. So the companies that are global companies, they attend industry events. They also have government relations employees who work in the legislative and regulatory circles around the globe, not just here in the U.S. So you look at Japan, you know, Southeast Asia, the European Union. So they're carrying water for ISAGCA, making sure that the legislators and regulators and other government entities see these standards. That's probably one of our biggest challenges, is just getting the standards out in front of folks who can either use them or require them. And, you know, once they become familiar with them, they realize that there's a whole lot of work that's been done that they're not going to have to do. And so that they'll embrace them. We do webinars. Companies do webinars. This is, you know, one of them. And there's, you know, we're starting to, as the COVID pandemic subsides, you know, we'll be doing more in-person presentations and promotion of the standards. We're also directly working with some government agencies here in the U.S. And interestingly, you know, this memorandum that just came out last week from the Biden administration describes, you know, the process through which policy will be rolled out through various agencies. So we're going to need to circle back with these agencies and their DHS leadership in the U.S. Let them know we're here and let them know that these standards exist and that we have good reach. We have these 2 or 3 consortiums of key players that can help out with the rollout of cybersecurity best practices. So a lot of different fronts.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Okay, just a reminder to the audience, we are in the Q&A session. We have our expert from ISA online and ready to answer you, so please send your questions in. You can do so now by entering it in the Q&A box and clicking Submit. Okay, back to the questions. Okay, here's another one from the audience. Pretty simple, but I'm sure very interesting. How can I get involved is the question.
Well, the easiest way to get involved is it's right on the first and last slide. Here's my contact information. Just shoot me an email, I'll connect you with our leaders for these various groups. You can get involved in the certification side of it through ISASecure. You can get involved through the Global Cybersecurity Alliance side of it. Just by being an ISA member, you can also work and you don't have to be a member, but you can also work on the standards committee. A lot of folks, they have a lot of technical skills and they are valuable additions to the standards committee. There's no cost. You don't have to be a member. All you have to do is sign up and you can be on an ISA standards committee. There's no restrictions.
Oh, that's great. Thank you for that. Okay, and looking at the queue, just seeing if we have any other questions from the audience. You still can submit now by entering it in the Q&A box and clicking Submit. We'll just give it a moment here to see if we have anything that pops up. And as a reminder to the audience, this entire webinar, including the Q&A session that we're in now, will be available for on-demand replay. It is the same link that you used today to access the on-demand content, and that will be available for the next 90 days after the live session ends. Okay, it does look like that was our last question, so we're going to move to close. So Andre, once again, thank you so much for that great presentation and taking the time to answer a couple questions for us. And of course, thank you to all the audience members for being part of this webinar event. You will be receiving an email from us with a link to the on-demand version, so you will be able to come back and watch this again, as I mentioned. And lastly, please take a moment to complete a survey, which will appear on your screen at the end of this live webinar. For on-demand viewers, you will find the survey located along the bottom of your attendee console in the survey widget. Again, thank you for taking the time to attend this webinar event. Take care, and we'll talk with you soon.